3 days before my first remote liveaboard trip, I woke up at 2 a.m. in a cold sweat. What if my mask strap breaks? What if my dive computer dies? What if I forget something I absolutely need? When you're diving from a boat that's days from the nearest dive shop, surrounded by nothing but ocean, gear failure isn't just inconvenient, it can end your trip. I'm Camila Reyes, and I learned this lesson the hard way when my mask strap actually did snap on day 2 of a 7-day trip to a remote atoll. Luckily, I'd packed a spare after reading way too many horror stories online. That moment taught me that packing for remote diving is its own skill, and getting it right before you're bobbing in the middle of nowhere is worth every minute of preparation. Remote liveaboards are diving vessels that take you to dive sites far from shore, often to locations that can't be reached by dayboats. We're talking about places like the Tabataha Reef in the Philippines, the far-flung atolls of the Maldives, the Socorro Islands off Mexico, or the distant reefs of Indonesia's Banda Sea. These trips typically last anywhere from 5 to 14 days, and you're living on the boat the entire time. The boat becomes your hotel, your dive center, your restaurant, and your entire world. Some remote liveaboards travel 8 to 12 hours overnight to reach dive sites, anchoring in protected waters where you might not see another vessel for days. What makes them remote isn't just the distance, it's the lack of infrastructure. There's no running back to shore if you forget your wetsuit boots. There's no popping into a dive shop if your regulator starts breathing funny. The closest help might be a full day's travel away, and in some cases, emergency evacuation requires a helicopter or seaplane. This isolation is exactly what makes these trips magical. You're diving pristine sites with almost no other divers around. But it also means you need to be completely self-sufficient with your gear. It's not just about having the right equipment, it's about having backups, spares, and the knowledge to handle basic repairs when there's no technician around to bail you out. Understanding how a typical liveaboard operates helps you see why certain gear becomes crucial. Most remote liveaboard trips follow a rhythm. You'll do 3 to 4 dives per day, sometimes including night dives. Your gear stays set up in a designated area, usually a dive deck, and you rinse it in communal tanks between dives. Here's where it gets different from shore diving. You're diving constantly. Your equipment doesn't get a full day to dry between dives. It lives in a humid, salt-soaked environment for days on end. O-rings that might last months in your local quarry can suddenly start to leak. Zippers that worked fine on weekend trips can seize up from the constant salt exposure. The boat provides the tanks, weights, and basic rental gear if needed, but you're responsible for everything else. Most remote liveaboards have minimal spare equipment, maybe a few rental BCDs or regulators, but they're not stocked like a dive shop. I've seen boats with one spare mask in a size that fit nobody, or a single backup fin that was 3 sizes too large. The diving itself tends to be more challenging than resort diving. You might encounter strong currents that require you to hold on to reef hooks. You'll do deeper dives that push your no decompression limits. The water temperatures can vary dramatically. I've done trips where the surface was 82 degrees, but thermoclines at 80 feet dropped it to 68. This means your gear needs to perform reliably under varying conditions, and you need to be comfortable maintaining it yourself. When your dive computer battery dies at 3 a.m. while you're anchored off a deserted island, there's no running out to find a replacement. You either have a backup plan or you miss dives. I used to think I was being overly cautious when I packed 2 of everything for my first serious liveaboard. Then I watched a guy on day 3 realize his only dive computer had flooded. He spent the rest of the week either buddy diving with shorter bottom times or sitting out dives entirely. That's a heartbreaking situation when you've paid thousands of dollars and traveled halfway around the world. The cost-benefit equation changes completely when you're remote. On a day boat, if something breaks, you miss one dive and hit a shop afterward. This means your gear needs to perform reliably under varying conditions, and you need to be comfortable maintaining it yourself. When your dive computer battery dies at 3 a.m. while you're anchored off a deserted island, there's no running out to find a replacement. You either have a backup plan or you miss dives. I used to think I was being overly cautious when I packed 2 of everything for my first serious liveaboard. Then I watched a guy on day 3 realize his only dive computer had flooded. He spent the rest of the week either buddy diving with shorter bottom times or sitting out dives entirely. That's a heartbreaking situation when you've paid thousands of dollars and traveled halfway around the world. The cost-benefit equation changes completely when you're remote. On a day boat, if something breaks, you miss 1 dive and hit a shop afterward. On a liveaboard in the middle of the Pacific, 1 equipment failure can cost you 3, 5, or even 10 dives, sometimes half your trip. The safety implications are even bigger. When you're doing 4 dives a day for a week straight, sometimes in challenging conditions with deep profiles and occasional decompression obligations, your equipment needs to be absolutely reliable. There's no, "I'll just skip today and get it checked tomorrow." The boat is moving, the dive sites are changing, and tomorrow's dives might be the highlight of the entire trip. The Hammerhead cleaning station or the Manta aggregation that only happens at dawn. I've also learned that crew resources are limited. The dive guides on remote liveaboards are incredibly skilled, but they're focused on guiding, safety, and navigation. They're not equipment technicians. Most can help with basic troubleshooting. They've fixed more gear in the field than I'll ever touch, but they can't rebuild a regulator or replace a dive computer. Their spare parts locker usually contains O-rings, zip ties, and maybe some wetsuit cement, not replacement parts for every piece of equipment on board. Environmental factors matter more, too. The combination of constant salt exposure, high humidity, intense sun, and no proper drying time between dives is tough on gear. Equipment that's perfectly fine for weekend diving can start showing problems after 3 days of non-stop use. I've had a mask strap that lasted 2 years suddenly crack on day 4 of a liveaboard. I've watched wetsuit zippers that seemed fine start sticking after a week of never fully drying. Now let me walk you through what I actually pack now after learning some lessons the expensive way. This isn't about bringing your entire garage, liveaboards have limited storage space, but about having the right redundancy where it counts. Your dive computer is non-negotiable. I run a primary wrist computer and always bring a second one. This used to feel excessive until I talked to a technical diving instructor who pointed out something obvious. If your computer dies or floods, you're either done diving or you're relying on someone else's computer and their conservatism settings, which means shorter dives than you planned. My primary is a Shearwater Peregrine, which I love for its readable screen and simple interface. Check the link below to see the current price. My backup is an older console computer that I keep in my spare parts kit. It doesn't need to be fancy, it just needs to work. Some divers use a simple bottom timer and dive tables as their backup, which works if you're comfortable with tables and conservative planning. At minimum, make sure whatever backup you bring has a fresh battery and has been tested recently. I check both computers before every trip by doing a shallow pool dive or quarry dive to confirm they're tracking correctly. This is where I see people make mistakes with masks. They'll pack their favorite mask and then throw in a cheap spare they bought years ago but never used. Then the primary mask strap breaks and they discover the backup leaks like crazy, or the fit is terrible, and now they're miserable for a week. I pack 2 masks that I've both used extensively. My primary is my everyday mask, perfectly fitted, comfortable, and fog-free with proper preparation. My backup is a slightly older mask that I rotate into service occasionally, so I know it still works well. Both live in hard cases to prevent scratching or crushing in my luggage. If you wear prescription lenses, this becomes even critical. Bring the prescription mask as your primary and a standard mask with contact lenses as backup, or vice versa. Just don't find yourself remote with no vision options. Here's where opinions split with regulators. Some divers bring one regulator setup with an octopus and trust that system completely. Others bring a complete spare regulator. I fall somewhere in the middle, leaning toward the spare. I bring my primary regulator setup, first stage, primary second stage, octopus, and gauges. Then I bring a compact second regulator in my checked luggage, completely separate. Modern regulators rarely fail catastrophically, and that's fair, but here's what I've seen happen. A first stage develops a slight free flow that gets worse throughout the trip. An octopus holder breaks and the octopus keeps dragging on the reef. A low pressure hose develops a pinhole leak. None of these are dangerous failures, but they're annoying enough that you'd want to swap to backup equipment if you had it. If you're doing a shorter Liveaboard, 5 days or less, and your primary regulator is recently serviced, a backup might be overkill. For longer trips, or if your regulator is approaching its service interval, I'd bring a spare. As a rule of thumb, if your regulator is within 3 months of needing service, get it done before the trip or bring a backup. One thing I never skip, making sure my regulator is DIN or yoke compatible with the boat's tanks. Most Liveaboards must specify what connection type they use, and some provide adapters, but you don't want to discover a compatibility problem on boarding day. Your BCD needs to work reliably for days straight without developing problems, and it needs to fit in your luggage without eating up all your weight allowance. This is one area where I see people struggle with the trade-off between features and packability. I use a back-inflate BCD that packs down reasonably small, not the absolute lightest travel BCD, but one that I know works well in current and provides enough lift for all my gear. Whatever you choose, make sure it's been thoroughly tested. A Liveaboard is not the place to break in brand new equipment. I want to know that my inflator button doesn't stick, that my dump valves work smoothly, that the straps stay adjusted where I set them, and that nothing weird happens when I'm hovering at my safety stop in current. I don't bring a backup BCD. That's one place where I draw the line on redundancy. BCDs rarely fail completely, and if something does go wrong, boats usually have rental BCDs available as a last resort. But I do check it carefully before the trip and do quick inspections throughout the week. This seems obvious with exposure protection, but I've watched people suffer through entire trips because they brought the wrong thermal protection. Being cold makes you miserable, burns through your air faster, and can even be dangerous on repetitive deep diving. Research your destination's actual water temperatures at depth, not just surface temps. I made this mistake once diving the Galapagos. The surface was 76 degrees, so I brought a 3 mil, but every dive hit thermoclines dropping to 60. I was freezing and couldn't enjoy some of the best diving of my life. For most tropical Liveaboards, a 3 to 5 mil wetsuit works well. For cooler destinations like California Liveaboards or the Galapagos, you'll want 7 mil or even a dry suit. I usually bring my primary wetsuit plus a rash guard or thin hooded vest I can layer underneath if I'm unexpectedly cold. A spare wetsuit is heavy and bulky, not practical for most people, but having some layering option gives you flexibility without killing your luggage weight. Pay attention to wetsuit condition before a long trip. Check the zippers, seams, and any Velcro closures. A wetsuit that's fine for weekend dives might start showing problems when it never fully dries between dives for a week. Fins are easy to overlook because they seem simple, but a bad fin situation on a Liveaboard is genuinely miserable. Blisters, cramping, or fins that keep falling off will wreck your week. Make sure your fins fit perfectly with the booties you're actually bringing. I've seen people pack fins that fit with thick-soled booties, but then bring thin-soled ones on the trip. I bring one pair of fins that I know work well for me. I don't bring backup fins unless I'm traveling to a destination known for extreme currents, where fin failure would be a serious problem. Fins are bulky, and the risk-benefit doesn't justify the luggage space for most trips. What I do bring: spare fin straps or spring straps. Straps break, buckles fail, and these parts are lightweight and easy to pack. I've fixed my own fins and helped other divers fix theirs more than once. Spring straps are more reliable than traditional rubber straps in my experience, but either way, having spares is smart. Beyond the big equipment, there are smaller items that become absolutely critical on remote liveaboards. I keep a dedicated Liveaboards spares kit that lives in a small dry bag in my carry-on. Multiple mask straps and a mask strap cover. Straps are cheap, lightweight, and they fail more often than anything else. I bring 2 spare straps for each mask. Takes up almost no space, costs almost nothing, but has saved my trip once and helped out other divers multiple times. Extra O-rings in various sizes. Most liveaboards will have some O-rings, but having your own kit means you're not dependent on anyone else. Generally, you want O-rings that fit your DIN or yoke connection, your BCD inflator hose connection, and any camera housing you're using. A basic O-ring assortment kit from most dive shops covers the common sizes. Silicone grease for O-rings. A small tube lasts forever and lets you maintain your own equipment. Every time you remove an O-ring or it gets dry, you should grease it before putting it back. Cable ties. These fix an astonishing number of problems: securing dangling hoses, repairing broken buckles, attaching accessories. I bring about 10 in various sizes. Wetsuit or dry suit cement, or Aquaseal. Small tears happen. Being able to patch them means you don't spend the rest of the trip with water seeping in. Defog solution or baby shampoo. Your mask will fog. A lot. The standard spit method becomes less effective after multiple dives per day. Proper defog solution works better and is more hygienic. I prefer the gel type over spray. Sunscreen and reef-safe after-sun care. You're going to get more sun exposure than you expect, even in a wetsuit. Hands, face, neck, everything exposed gets hammered. Many remote destinations have restrictions on sunscreen types, so research what's allowed. Basic tools. A multi-tool or small adjustable wrench can help with basic equipment adjustments. I bring a small screwdriver and Allen key set that fits my BCD and camera housing screws. Spare batteries for everything. Dive computer, camera, strobes, flashlight. This is one area where you can never have too many backups. Seasickness medication. Even if you never get seasick on day boats, a multi-day ocean passage might be different. Better to have it and not need it. Small flashlight or backup dive light. Even if you're not planning night dives, a small light helps you see into crevices, signal the dive master, or navigate the boat at night. I bring a small primary light and a tiny backup that clips to my BCD. Here is something I didn't fully appreciate until my second liveaboard. How you pack matters almost as much as what you pack. The best gear in the world doesn't help if it's lost, damaged in transit, or so disorganized you can't find what you need. I use a combination approach, a rolling duffel bag for most of my dive gear, and a carry-on backpack with all my critical items and electronics. My basic rule is this: anything that would ruin my trip if lost goes in carry-on. That means my dive computers, regulators, mask, camera body, and spare parts kit all travel in my carry-on. Yes, it makes for a heavy carry-on, but I've never had issues with airlines when I explain it's dive equipment. My BCD, wetsuit, fins, and everything else goes in checked luggage. For the checked bag, I use a mesh dive bag on most trips, but for remote liveaboards, I actually prefer a roller duffel with better structure and padding. My BCD needs some protection, and the long transit times to remote destinations mean luggage takes more abuse. Inside my luggage, I use packing cubes and dry bags to organize by category. One bag for wetsuit and booties, one for tools and spare parts except what's in my carry-on kit, one for non-dive clothing. This matters when you're living on a boat. You need to find things quickly in limited space. Weight management is real. Most liveaboards are in remote destinations reached by smaller aircraft or boats, and weight restrictions can be stricter than you expect. I've learned to weigh my bags before I leave home. If you're over, you need to make hard choices. Can you rent something at the boat? Can you leave behind a less essential item? I'll admit I'm biased here. I love underwater photography and I always bring my camera on liveaboards. But camera gear adds complexity, weight, and risk. If you're into photography, camera-specific planning becomes essential. My complete camera kit includes my housing, strobes, arms, wet lenses, and all the associated accessories. This is where organization becomes critical. I keep my camera body, housing, and main lens in my carry-on. Strobes, arms, and extra lenses go in checked luggage, heavily padded with wetsuit pieces and towels. I bring extensive backup gear for photography. Spare strobe batteries, backup sync cords, extra O-rings for the housing and any ports, silica gel packets to reduce internal condensation, and a rocket blower for sensor cleaning. I also bring basic tools to adjust my strobe arms and tighten any loose connections. One thing I've learned, you need a system for managing memory cards and batteries on the boat. I use a small organizer that holds 4 memory cards, empty cards on one side, full cards on the other. I charge batteries every night and keep them in a labeled case, so I always know which are charged. Understanding your camera settings before the trip is essential. A Liveaboard is not the time to be figuring out how your strobes sync or why your white balance is off. This section isn't fun or exciting, but it's part of what people often overlook until they need it desperately. Dive certification cards. I bring my physical certification card and also keep a photo of it on my phone and in my email. Some boats want to see your actual card, others accept photos. Having multiple backups means you're covered. Dive insurance. I use DAN, Divers Alert Network insurance, which covers emergency evacuation and chamber treatment. When you're in a remote location, evacuation costs can be astronomical, tens of thousands of dollars. The peace of mind is worth the relatively small annual fee. Dive log with recent dives. Many Liveaboards want to see recent dive experience to assess your skill level. I keep a digital log, my dive computer tracks everything, and also maintain a paper logbook with my last 20 dives summarized. If you're doing advanced sites, deep dives, strong currents, or challenging conditions, having proof of recent experience matters. Passport, visas, and copies. Obvious, but worth stating. I keep photos of my passport and any necessary visas on my phone in addition to the physical documents. For really remote destinations, you might need specific permits or documentation to enter certain marine areas. Medical kit. Most boats have a first aid kit, but I bring personal medications, seasickness pills, antihistamines, and pain relievers. If you have any prescription medications, bring extra. Don't pack just barely enough for the trip duration. Emergency contact information. Written down, not just in your phone. If something happens to you, the crew needs to know who to contact and any relevant medical history. One lesson I've learned the hard way, never bring untested gear on a remote Liveaboard. I once bought a new dive computer 3 weeks before a trip, figured it was fine since it was new, and discovered on the first dive that I'd misconfigured the nitrox settings. Not dangerous, I caught it, but frustrating and avoidable. Now I have a pre-Liveaboard testing routine. About 2 weeks before departure, I do a full gear checkout dive at my local site, full equipment, exactly as I'll use it on the trip. Test both dive computers on the same dive. Confirm they're tracking similarly and that all settings are correct. If you're diving nitrox on the Liveaboard, set the computers to nitrox for the test dive, even if you're using air. You want to practice changing the gas mix settings. Check your regulator for any unusual breathing resistance or bubbles. If anything seems off, slight free flow, harder breathing at depth, weird noises, get it checked out. Don't assume minor issues will stay minor. Test your BCD inflation and dump valves underwater. Make sure your low-pressure inflator button doesn't stick and that your dump valves respond smoothly. Check all straps and buckles for wear. Verify your wetsuit still fits well, and check the zipper action. If it's sticky or hard to close, it might fail during your trip. If you're bringing camera gear, do a full dive test with your complete setup. Housing, strobes, focus lights, everything. Test every button and control underwater. Confirm your strobes are firing correctly. Take test shots at various distances and settings. After the test dive, rinse everything thoroughly and inspect it carefully. This is your chance to spot and fix problems before they ruin your trip. Replace any questionable O-rings, tighten loose screws, and address anything that doesn't feel quite right. Not all remote Liveaboards are the same, and your gear needs might shift depending on the destination and diving style. Tropical coral reef Liveaboards, like the Red Sea, Maldives, or Raja Ampat, generally offer the easiest diving conditions: warm water, good visibility, moderate depths. You can get away with lighter gear: 3mm wetsuit, standard recreational equipment, basic camera setup. The remoteness is more about distance from shore than technical difficulty. Big animal pelagic Liveaboards like Socorro, Cocos Island, or Galapagos focus on sharks, mantas, and whale sharks, often in cooler water with more current and deeper dives. You'll want a thicker wetsuit, 5 to 7 millimeters, experience with currents and reef hooks, and potentially a more robust camera setup for big animal photography. The diving is more physically demanding, so equipment reliability matters even more. Wreck-focused Liveaboards like Truck Lagoon or the Red Sea wrecks involve more penetration diving or at least close-up wreck exploration. You'll want excellent light management. Primary and backup lights are essential. Your gauges and computer need to be easily readable in dark spaces. Dive planning is more precise, so having a reliable computer with good dive planning features matters. Cold water Liveaboards like California, British Columbia, or Norway require dry suit skills and cold water regulators. Cold water diving is more gear intensive, and equipment failures can have more serious consequences. The key is researching your specific destination and being honest about your experience level. A remote Liveaboard isn't the place to push way beyond your comfort zone with new conditions or environments. Every remote Liveaboard I've done has had some combination of baggage restrictions, airline weight limits, boat storage space limits, or tender weight limits for small skiffs that ferry you to dive sites. You can't bring everything, so you need to prioritize. Critical items you can't dive without: mask, dive computer, regulator, BCD, wetsuit, fins. If there's a backup version that's lighter or more compact, bring that as your spare. Important items that significantly degrade experience if missing: camera gear for photographers, reef hooks for current diving, backup mask and computer. Nice to have items that improve comfort or convenience: extra wetsuit layering pieces, full toolkit, extensive spare parts beyond basics. Leave at home: backup fins, backup BCD, anything you can rent in an emergency, single-use items you can improvise. I've seen divers show up with 200 pounds of gear for a one-week trip. It's excessive. With smart packing and good gear choices, you can cover everything you actually need in 50 to 70 pounds of checked luggage, plus a 20 to 25-pound carry-on. Weight-saving strategies I use: choose lightweight versions of key gear. Dive BCDs are typically 4 to 6 pounds lighter than full-featured BCDs. Coordinate with your dive buddy. If you're traveling with a buddy, split some backup items. One person brings the toolkit, the other brings extra O-rings and spare parts. Rent what you can. If the boat rents weights, and most do, or tanks, obviously, don't bring your own. Pack multi-purpose items. A buff or bandana can work as a mask strap cover, hair tie, sun protection, or towel. A dive light can serve as a night navigation light and an emergency flashlight on the boat. Looking back at my first few Liveaboards, I made basically every mistake possible. Here's what I wish someone had told me. Not breaking in new gear before the trip. I once brought brand new booties that gave me blisters by day 2. Always test new equipment thoroughly before a remote trip, ideally multiple dives in similar conditions. Bringing too much instead of too little. My first Liveaboard I packed like I was moving abroad. I had 3 masks, backup everything, and enough spare parts to open a small dive shop. It was ridiculous and unnecessary. I've gradually trimmed down to just what actually matters. Ignoring service intervals. I took a regulator on a Liveaboard when it was 6 months overdue for service. It worked fine for most dives, but developed a slight free flow on the last day. I should have just gotten it serviced beforehand. The peace of mind is worth the cost. Not protecting electronics properly. I once packed my dive computer loose in my luggage where it got banged around by fins and tanks. The screen didn't crack, but it definitely got scratched. Everything sensitive now goes in a hard case or protected pouch. Assuming the boat would have spare parts. On my second Liveaboard, my low-pressure inflator hose developed a slow leak. The boat didn't have a replacement, and I spent the rest of the trip manually inflating my BCD. Now I bring spare hoses. Not bringing enough memory cards for photography. I ran out of card space on day 5 of a 7-day trip. Either bring enough cards or bring a laptop to offload images. Running out of storage when you're surrounded by incredible subjects is painful. Packing my dive computer in checked luggage instead of carry-on. When my checked bag was delayed by 2 days on the way to a Liveaboard in Indonesia, I didn't have my computer for the first several dives. Thankfully, the boat rented computers, but I lost all that dive data and had to use an unfamiliar computer in advanced conditions. Let me address some questions that come up constantly about remote Liveaboard gear. What happens if your essential gear breaks during a remote Liveaboard and you don't have a backup? If critical gear, like your dive computer or regulator, fails without a backup available, your options are limited but not hopeless. Most Liveaboards carry some rental equipment, usually a few BCDs, regulators, and dive computers, though the selection is typically minimal and often lower quality than what you'd find at a dive shop. You might be able to borrow from another diver if they have spares, which is why it's worth being friendly with your fellow passengers. In the worst case, if you can't safely dive without that piece of equipment and no substitute exists, you'll have to sit out dives until the boat returns to port where you can replace the gear. This is heartbreaking after investing thousands in the trip, which is exactly why bringing backups for critical items isn't paranoia, it's practical planning that lets you keep diving when something inevitably goes wrong. Should you bring your own weights on a remote Liveaboard or rent them from the boat? Definitely rent weights from the boat. Every Liveaboard I've been on provides weights included in the trip cost, and bringing your own would destroy your luggage weight allowance for no benefit. The boat will have plenty of weight blocks and usually several weight belt options or integrated weight pockets you can use with your BCD. What you should bring instead is any specialized weight configuration you prefer. If you use a particular style of weight belt with a specific buckle you like, bring the empty belt and load it with the boat's weights. Some divers who use ankle weights or trim weights bring those specifically if they have unusual placement preferences. But even that's optional for most recreational diving. Save your baggage weight for equipment that matters. Weights are universally available and standardized. How do you know if your dive computer battery will last through an entire Liveaboard trip? Most modern dive computers will easily last a week-long Liveaboard on a single battery charge, but you should verify your specific model's battery life before the trip. Check your computer's battery indicator before you leave. If it's showing anything less than 75% full, either charge it or replace the battery, depending on your model. User-replaceable battery computers, like many Suunto models, should get a fresh battery if the current one has been in for more than 6 months of regular diving. Rechargeable computers, like the Shearwater Peregrine or Tarik, should be fully charged before departure and can usually be topped up on the boat if needed. Bring your charging cable in your carry-on. For longer trips of 10+ days with 4 to 5 dives per day, you might want to bring a spare battery if your model uses replaceable batteries or plan to recharge mid-trip. When in doubt, consult your manual for the estimated battery life based on dive frequency. Manufacturers typically specify how many hours or dives you'll get per charge or battery. Can you rely on the Liveaboard crew to help repair your equipment if something breaks? Liveaboard crews are generally experienced and helpful with basic troubleshooting, but you shouldn't count on them for significant repairs or specialized technical work. Most dive guides and crew members can handle simple fixes, like replacing O-rings, adjusting BCD straps, patching minor wetsuit tears, or troubleshooting common problems like mask leaks or inflator button issues. I've seen crew members perform minor miracles with zip ties and wetsuit cement. However, they're not certified technicians and won't have the parts or expertise to rebuild a regulator, fix a dive computer malfunction, or repair complex camera housing problems. The crew's priority is guiding dives safely and running the boat, not functioning as an onboard repair shop. Think of them as a helpful resource for minor issues, but bring your own spare parts kit and backup equipment for anything critical. If you need their help, approach them during non-dive times when they're not busy with boat operations or dive briefings, and always be appreciative. They're going out of their way to help you rather than performing their primary job duties. Is it worth bringing a spare regulator on a Liveaboard if you've never had regulator problems before? This depends on the length and remoteness of your specific trip, plus when your regulator was last serviced. For shorter Liveaboards of 5 days or less in relatively accessible locations, and if your regulator was professionally serviced within the last year, a backup is probably unnecessary. Modern regulators are extremely reliable and catastrophic failures are rare. However, for longer trips of 7 to 10+ days in truly remote locations, or if your regulator is approaching its service interval, bringing a spare makes more sense. I've personally seen regs develop slow leaks, free flows, or breathing resistance issues mid-trip that weren't dangerous but made diving less enjoyable. Having a backup meant swapping to the spare and continuing without stress. A reasonable middle ground is bringing a compact, lightweight second regulator in your checked bag rather than a full duplicate of your primary setup. You can find used or basic regulators specifically for this backup purpose that don't cost much and provide peace of mind. Consider your own comfort level with risk versus reward. Is potentially sitting out multiple days of diving after flying halfway around the world worth saving a few pounds of luggage space? Essential gear for remote Liveaboards isn't a one-size-fits-all checklist. It's a framework you adapt to your specific trip, diving style, and experience level. The gear that's essential for me as a warm water photographer might be totally different from what's essential for a cold water tech diver or a beginner making their first Liveaboard trip. Start with the absolute basics: mask, computer, regulator, BCD, exposure protection, and fins. Those 6 items are non-negotiable for any dive trip. Then add 1 layer of redundancy for the items that would end your trip if they failed: backup mask, backup computer. From there, customize based on your specific destination and diving style. Research the conditions you'll encounter: water temperature at depth, current strength, typical visibility, type of diving, whether it's reef, wreck, or big animals. Read trip reports from the specific boat or destination. Ask on diving forums what other people found essential. Test everything before you go, not just once, but ideally multiple times in conditions similar to what you'll encounter. Pack smart, prioritizing weight and space for critical items. Bring spare parts and tools for basic maintenance. Keep your most valuable and essential items in carry-on luggage. Most importantly, remember that gear is just what enables the experience. It's not the experience itself. The goal isn't to have perfect equipment or to bring every possible backup item. The goal is to have reliable gear that lets you focus on the incredible diving, the amazing marine life, and the adventure of being in remote places that most people never get to see. When your equipment just works, when you don't have to think about it or stress over it, that's when you're free to fully experience why you traveled so far in the first place. I'm still learning and refining my own liveaboard packing with each trip. What worked on one destination might not work on another, but having the foundation of essential gear dialed in means I spend less time worrying about equipment and more time enjoying being underwater in some of the most incredible places on Earth.